As the population expanded, publishers saw a market for newspapers. In the mid-1800s, political bias was not something to be ashamed of, and newspapers openly aligned themselves with their favored party. Without television, radio, and internet to compete, even small cities like Hudson had several newspapers.
The distinction of the first newspaper published in northwestern Wisconsin belongs to the St. Croix Banner. First published in Hudson on January 20th, 1850 by Colonel James Hughes and his wife Elizabeth Hughes. It was aligned politically with the Whig Party and was short-lived. Hughes was a native of Ohio and came to the St. Croix Valley in 1849.
In 1853, the Hudson Journal was started by U.B. Shaver. It was Democratic politically until Colonel Hughes became the proprietor, who then changed its politics and its name to the Hudson Republican. A handful of papers came and went in the next few years. The St. Croix Inquirer, the Hudson, Shield, and Banner, later renamed the Pathfinder. In 1871, the Hudson True Republican was established by David and Marcus Fulton and sold in 1876 to George D. Klein and his partner Sabret. Klein continued publication until 1918.
And this was the home of the editor of the paper, but his name was George D. Klein, and he was the publisher of the rival newspaper in Hudson, which was the True Republican, which was a Democratic newspaper.
In 1854, the North Star first appeared with Dr. Otis Hoyt as owner and U.B. Shaver as editor. The Star, also known as the Hudson Star, was strongly Democratic. It changed proprietors several times and in 1894 consolidated with the Hudson City Times. The Hudson Chronicle was a Republican paper published first by J.S. Beale and James Wilson. In 1860, Horace Taylor, who had founded the River Falls Journal, purchased the Chronicle and changed its name to Hudson City Times. Taylor later purchased the Hudson Star and combined the two to form the Hudson Star and Times, a forerunner of the present-day paper in Hudson, the Hudson Star Observer.
This is where Horace D. Taylor lived. He was a publisher of the Star Observer, Star and Times, and he became the American consul to France during the 1880s, and later became a very well-known politician and publisher in Madison, Wisconsin.
In addition to being a newspaperman, Horace Taylor was an accomplished politician. In 1876, he was appointed state timber agent, and in 1881, he was appointed United States Consul to Marseille, France, by President James Garfield. However, this appointment had tragic repercussions for Garfield. The deranged Charles Guiteau believed he deserved the consul post. The disgruntled Guiteau gunned down President Garfield, and the president died 3 months later from infections due to the medical care he received. In 1888, Taylor was elected to the state Senate. He was then appointed as the U.S. Railroad Commissioner. In 1890, Taylor became the principal shareholder of the Wisconsin State Journal and left Hudson permanently. He was appointed U.S. Assistant Secretary of the Treasury from 1899 to 1909. Horace died in 1910. In 1901, the St. Croix Observer was moved from Baldwin, and in 1905 was merged with the Star and Times and later became the present-day Hudson Star Observer. The Star Observer changed hands several times before 1952, when Yvette Ward became publisher and Willis H. Miller the editor. In 1958, a corporation was formed with Willis Miller as principal stockholder, but governed by a board of directors. Miller continued as publisher and editor until 1970, when Glenn Schreiber became editor. In 1984, Miller sold his principal ownership but still worked for the paper.
I think we're the sixth oldest paper in Wisconsin. Our paper was founded in 1854. After I sold most of my shares in the early or the mid-'80s, I sold to Steve Keller, and he in turn sold to Arlen Albrecht from the Red Wing Eagle. And then Jay Griggs was the publisher for a while. And then now, of course, we have that Stephen Zubay is the publisher of the paper. Zubay came in under the, when the Red Wing Eagle was sold to the Fargo, North Dakota Forum.
In 1987, the Hudson Star-Observer, one of the city's oldest surviving businesses and earliest area newspapers, ceased to be locally owned when it was sold to Red Wing Publishing Company. At that time, the newspaper office was moved from its historic location at 112 Walnut Street to 226 Locust Street. It has since been sold to Forum Communications. While a small news staff remains in Hudson, much of the business operation has been transferred to a new facility in River Falls, Wisconsin. Church and community played an important role in the settlement of the land, as early settlers would often recruit family and friends from back home to join them in the new land. By the end of the 1850s, the booming town of Hudson boasted churches of several denominations. Some of the older church buildings remain today. The Baptists were the first to organize a church in Hudson.
The first pastor, the founding pastor of this church in 1852 was Samuel Catlin, and he was a godly man, and he suffered much as a frontier pastor. Most of his children died of diseases of the time, 3 of them while he was pastor of this church. But he got this thing going. He rallied the potential Baptists and got enough unity to get something started. This is not the original church. That was one that preceded it. It was a long, low building, and it was the chief meeting place of Hudson at that time. This is where you had public meetings. This is the only place big enough. It wasn't big like this, but in that time it was big. That building, are you ready for this, is still standing within 1 block of here, that way. So in this throwaway world, a few things do get conserved.
The present First Baptist Church was built in 1866 by Amma Andrews. It has the distinction of being Hudson's oldest church still in use.
Now, when the building was finished, it still didn't have a bell. And they ordered a bell from the McNeely Bell Foundry in Troy, New York. And when it arrived, they built scaffolding to hoist it up into the tower. And when they got everything ready and the men pulled on the ropes, they couldn't budge the bell off the ground. All the manpower they had there just couldn't budge that bell. It was really too late to order horses to come in, but they remembered that the school children were just about to be let out. So they grabbed all the school children, a lot of them, and they ran a long rope down 3rd Street there and put the kids on it and hoisted the bell up into the tower. True story. The church in 1872 acquired a pipe organ. They always wanted a pipe organ, a real organ. All they had was a little parlor pump organ. Well, meanwhile, this organ was giving them fits. They kept a pile of paper clips on a certain ledge up in front, and when the linkages gave out, somebody would go up there with the paper clips and open this panel and go in there and paper clip the linkages together.
Among the foremost pillars of the Baptist Church was John Moffett Hughes, who was organist and choir director there for 60 years. Heidi Rushman asks John Hughes about the Baptist Church.
Tell me what you remember about the Baptist Church and your father being there.
Every Sunday afternoon, he would go down there and repair the leather, the air sacs that hold the air. It's leather, and they always were getting holes in them. And he was patching. That's how he spent Sunday afternoon.
100 years later, in 1972, Dr. Kim Kasling, and he's still teaching at St. John's University, passing by, he had the thought, I wonder what kind of an organ they have in that building. That he had discovered in Hudson, Wisconsin, one of the finest organs, probably the oldest in the Midwest, and still working. A lot of people had been saying, before Kim Kasling arrived, get rid of it. It's a pile of junk. Kim Kasling brought a different perspective. This is a national treasure, do something. And they did, but it took many years to raise the money. Casey Marin restored authentically every detail exactly as it was when it left the studio of the builder in New York City. This is the historic Jardine pipe organ, built in 1864 in New York City. It is older than this room, and this room is the oldest public room in Hudson. The organist of the church that at that time was John Swanson. Well, he was so excited over this work going on. He was just jumping with excitement that something was being done about this organ. He always did think it was an outstanding organ.
John Swanson was the grandson of the original organist, John Moffett Hughes. The Comstock and Spooner families were also members.
The Presbyterian Church dates from the early 1870s, and the back addition there was given by W.H. Phipps.
At the great Dr. James Hendy's Hall on Walnut Street, right where Dick's Bar is now. And he had a nice hall over here. He built this hall. The upstairs where all the literary societies met. The Presbyterian Church met there. 1854, there was the Presbyterian minister, and he was having church at the Hendy's Hall.
The Presbyterians organized with Reverend Charles Thayer as their leader and a membership of 10. In 1857, a small frame building was erected at the corner of 3rd and Orange Streets. In 1873, the small building was moved to make room for the large First Presbyterian Church that still stands. Today, the church building is owned by the Beth Emanuel Sabbath Christian Fellowship congregation. The First Presbyterian congregation moved to a new church at 1901 Vine Street in January 2006.
And this is St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which dates from 1882.
The Episcopalians had their beginnings with visits from Reverend J. Kemper, Bishop of the Northwest Territory in the 1850s and 1860s. Reverend Henry Langloh took charge of the mission in Hudson in 1879. And in 1882, the cornerstone of the church at 900 4th Street was laid with a dedication in 1884. St. Paul's Episcopal built a new church at 502 County Road UU, while the original building now houses Christensen Creative. Over the years, several other denominations have built new churches: Methodist, Lutheran, and many other churches, such as the Catholic Church. In 1856, under the directorship of Father J.J. McGee, the Catholics organized and built their first church.
The church's name was First St. James, and the first Catholic church was located at 2nd and St. Croix.
The rectory with a glass cupola built at 1220 2nd Street was later purchased by the widow of John Page and became known as the Page or Cupola House. In 1872, construction began on a larger church at the corner of 4th and St. Croix Streets. that was dedicated in 1874. This church stood until 1991 when a new St. Patrick's Catholic Church was completed at 1500 Vine Street. St. Patrick's also built the city's first parochial school in 1889. The Hudson public school system can be traced back to 1849, when School District Number 1 for the town of Buena Vista, now Hudson, was formed at a meeting held in the home of Milton nobles. Sarah Partridge signed a contract to teach 5 months of school for $4 per week. The first classes were taught in the rear section of the Brunswick Hotel, which was located at the corner of First and Walnut Streets. Miss Partridge was believed to have had about 25 students. In the next handful of years, several different impromptu classrooms hosted students, and several teachers were hired. The first permanent 2-room school building was constructed in 1855 on 6th Street between Locust and Vine. It was the first structure in St. Croix County built by taxpayers to be used exclusively for school purposes. This building, later enlarged to 6 rooms, also served as Hudson's first high school from 1880 until 1887. In 1887, Hudson erected a high school building at the northeast corner of 4th and Oak Streets. It was a beautiful structure, but unfortunately, due to a mistake in the original construction bid, it was built with cheaper materials. The citizens' pride in the new structure was short-lived, as it was a poorly constructed building, and by 1889 it needed extensive structural repairs.
Well, my first teacher was Norma Goldberg, and she was a young married woman, and kindergarten was in the old high school that had been built in 1887, and it was raised in 1924. But it was in the basement, and the students, of course, we came to the kindergarten in the mornings and then went home. And she was my first teacher.
In 1917, the 6th Street School was completely destroyed in a spectacular fire. Up until the time of the fire, the public schools had been operated by the city of Hudson. Many squabbles over funds took place, and the need for a new school was too much of a burden for the city. On February 28, 1917, a petition was created calling for an independent school district in Hudson. It was passed in July, creating the School District of Hudson. Due to the fire, space was needed. In 1919, a new high school was built on 4th Street. This building served as a high school for over 50 years until a new Hudson High School at 1501 Vine Street opened its doors in 1975. The 4th Street building was used as a middle school from 1975 to 1994. It is now Willow River Elementary School.
Oh, I went to the Hudson School all the time. When we lived up on the farm, I used to walk from way up there down to the school on 4th Street. So I walked about well over a mile every day through most of my school years. But my dad wouldn't let me go down the highway because there were a couple of semis that might go up and down. So I couldn't go on the highway because of those semis.
Yeah. That was the only way that they were coming in and going over to the cities,
Well,
or back from the cities in those
yeah.
days.
Yeah.
That was Vine Street or Highway 12.
Yeah,
only.
right. Mm-hmm.
Can you remember any of the names of the teachers? Did you have Ann Murphy or Helen?
Oh, yeah,
Hughes?
Ann Murphy. She was one that was really strict. Uh-huh.
I'm a 3rd generation of people living in Hudson. My grandmother and my mother and myself, and we all had names of Ruth. My grandmother's name was Ruth Warner, and her house was down on 2nd Street. She was a remarkable lady. Her husband died when my mother was a senior in high school, So to make ends meet, she had boarders. 5 days a week, she cooked a dinner on a wood stove. She was a remarkable lady, worked very hard. The boarders were teachers, several teachers, and the druggist, a bachelor man, Mr. Getchell. One of the teachers was my 8th grade history teacher. And my friends called me teacher's pet because she ate at my grandmother's, and she liked my grandmother so well, so she liked me too. Well, Kate Ryan was the 8th grade teacher, and she taught there many, many years. She was quite a lady. She had quite a temper, and when I can remember one day, she was telling the boys and all of the girls how to take care of their books and be careful with them. Then at that time, some boy did something that she didn't like. She threw the book at him. So she had different moods. She also read Evangeline to us every year and cried every year over it because she felt that was such a sad story. My favorite teacher was the 8th grade teacher, Anne Murphy. And she was just an Irish lady with a wonderful sense of humor, and all the children just loved her. She was a very good teacher. History and mathematics we had with her.
I think the first teacher that really meant something to me was Anne Murphy. And she was a good teacher and a good disciplinarian. And then later when I was in high school, I took a class on commercial geography from her. I think that got me interested in the world and so on.
In high school, my brother and I ended up in the same class. And we graduated in 1932. It happened that I graduated from high school when I was 15, and we had a great time in high school. Music was a great part of my career in high school, and it has been all my life. I also played an instrument. I played the clarinet. My brother did too. And the boy I later married was also in our class. He was a musician too. His name was Curtis Burkholder. All three of us were in the first band in high school. The first band that they had ever had. They had a man from, a Mr. Dave Dahl from the city would come over every week, and we just were thrilled, so thrilled to have the music. And he would teach us. He gave everybody private lessons. He even had a marching band. With the same, we all learned that. And they every year had a festival, music festival at River Falls. And our marching band won the trophy, and we were so proud. We had uniforms. All the uniforms we had was a red cape and a little cap, but we thought that was great.
As Hudson grew, several other schools were built. The first Ward School was a one-story structure that stood on the site of the present Carmelite Monastery on Laurel Avenue. In the late 1860s, the third Ward School was built at 1129 7th Street. This red brick building is still standing and is now a private home.
And to me, one of the most interesting things about this picture is the beautiful oak tree there on the side. We see that. And it was Corrine Stayberg Jensen that planted that tree on Arbor Day in 1895, and it is still there.
The old 2nd Street School was built in 1883 at 1015 2nd Street. After it was no longer used as a school, it served as a hospital for a time, then as an apartment building until it was razed to make way for Croy View Apartments. North Hudson's first public school was located on St. Croix Street North between 4th and 5th Streets. It was replaced in 1893 and operated at that site until the mid-1950s. The school then moved to a new building at 510 Lemon Street North. Consolidation of the Hudson School District began in the 1950s with the closing of the one-room schools. By the early 1960s, Holton Elementary at 70 County Road E and North Hudson Elementary at 510 Lemon Street North were brought into the system. Other schools include E.P. Rock Elementary at 340 13th Street, built in 1957. The junior high school was built in 1962 at 1401 Vine Street, with a present high school building erected directly to its east in 1975. These two buildings were joined by the addition of an auditorium and lunchroom in 1994. Hudson Middle School became a reality in 1994 at 1300 Carmichael Road, with Hudson Prairie Elementary joining the complex in 1998. The newest school in the district is Rivercrest Elementary at 535 County Road F, built in 2008. The Catholic Parish Parochial School dates back to the 1870s, when Father Thomas Kelly opened St. Mary's Academy on the Hill in the short-lived Hinckley Institute, a military school that was built at 739 11th Street. Father Kelly later initiated the building of St. Patrick's Original School in 1889 on 4th Street between St. Croix and River Streets. This building was razed in 1953 to make way for a new school and gymnasium. The school was expanded again in the late 1990s. Trinity Lutheran Church opened Trinity Tots in 1977. The preschool has grown into Trinity Academy and now includes kindergarten to 8th grade. Galahad School was a private academy for boys which flourished in North Hudson from 1905 to 1917. The school was originally on a 10-acre site along the St. Croix River, later expanded to 25 acres and included 1,800 feet of shoreline. The school campus included several dormitories and a large gymnasium. Rules at the school were rigid by today's standards. The course of study was planned to meet college requirements.
My mother was married in 1911 to her high school sweetheart she met at Galahad, which was a private boys' school. The buildings are now gone over there. There's no sign of Galahad, but it was a very fine school. And socially, the boys would get together with the high school girls here, and that's where my mother met my father.
Jean Jefferson Penfield, daughter of local banker Amos Jefferson, was instrumental in establishing Galahad School. Her son, Dr. Wilder G. Penfield, was the school's most illustrious alumnus, a world-famous brain surgeon who mapped the human brain and founded the prestigious Montreal Neurological Institute.
Well, Dr. Penfield, his mother was a matron at the Galahad School in North Hudson. And so he spent a lot of his youth here. And then he was married and moved elsewhere. He went to Princeton. He went to school in Europe, and he lived in Montreal. He became probably the greatest brain surgeon of his time. And he was here. He was given the Order of Merit by Queen Elizabeth, and the Order of Merit is only allotted to British citizens. Only 24 at a time can be in the Order of Merit. And he was supposedly the greatest living Canadian for many years.
With the United States entering World War I in 1917, Galahad School closed due to the intensely patriotic spirit of both teachers and students who enlisted in the military. Their motto, "At once to the last man." The school's main building, a magnificent brownstone structure, was built in 1853, once home of railroad entrepreneur Daniel Baldwin. The building was eventually abandoned and fell into disrepair until it was razed in 1954. By the 1860s, Hudson was growing quickly. The city was beginning to recover from the financial panic of 1857. Much of the city's progress would come to a halt as the nation began a bloody civil war in 1861.
In 1855, in the fall of 1855, the first military group in Hudson was formed. It was called the Hudson Light Artillery. And a very interesting gentleman who was a Mexican War veteran was the captain. They elected their officers, as you're well aware. And his name was Otis Hoyt. He was a doctor. He was originally with the 1st Massachusetts. Then he served in Mexico with the 3rd Massachusetts. Came to Fort Snelling in the late 1840s with his medical degree. He was just a hell of an entrepreneur. He was involved in the railroads. He lost and made several fortunes in the area, and finally settled down about 1866 or so to practice medicine until his death. He was the captain, and he had an interesting military background, being a veteran of the Mexican conflict. He elected along with it was his son-in-law, Mr. Dexter, a few other people, most of whom were merchants and important people along the river, mostly attorneys and merchants. And these were our first military, this was our first military group. Somewhere shortly after that, the Hudson City Guards evolved. This would be about 1859.
At the beginning of the Civil War, Dr. Hoyt was appointed inspector of the 2nd Brigade, 11th Division. In August of 1862, he was appointed examining surgeon for St. Croix County, and in September 1862, he was appointed surgeon of the 30th Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. His regiment served in General Sibley's Northwestern Indian Expedition. Later, he served as brigade surgeon at Bowling Green and Louisville, Kentucky. He was mustered out of the service September 1865 and returned to Hudson. Dr. Otis Hoyt had previously served as a surgeon during the Mexican War under Colonel Caleb Cushing, and it was with Cushing that Hoyt first came up the St. Croix River, where they noted the great possibilities in water power, timber, and land. In 1848, Dr. Hoyt brought his family to the area, but due to the lack of housing, they lived in St. Croix Falls. In 1850, Dr. Hoyt was the first doctor to open an office in Willow River, and at that time he was the only doctor within 150 miles on the east side of the St. Croix River. In 1853, he built a grand house on the northeast corner of 3rd and Locust Streets. In addition to the practice of medicine, Dr. Hoyt held several official positions. He was appointed St. Croix County Land Appraiser in 1851. In 1852, Dr. Hoyt was elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly. He established the Hudson North Star newspapers in 1854. Dr. Hoyt owned the Hoyt House, a very popular lodging house. He was one of the founders of Hudson's first bank in 1857, the Farmers Bank. The Hoyts also had a farm just west of town. In the mid-1850s, Dr. Hoyt was one of the principal promoters of the St. Croix and Lake Superior Railroad and helped procure the valuable 1856 land grants. Dr. Hoyt's sudden death in 1885 caused deep sorrow. Hoyt was one of the oldest and most distinguished doctors in the region. It is estimated that nearly 1,000 people attended his funeral.
The 30th Infantry Regiment of Wisconsin was organized on October 21st of 1862. Colonel Dill was from Prescott. The men on the regional staff, one of them was Sidney L. Starr. Sidney Starr was one of the original publishers of the Hudson North Star, precursor of the Hudson Star Observer. We had David Fulton. David Fulton was a captain of D Company. George Dinsmore was there. Henry Wilson was a local attorney, became a very famous attorney in Minneapolis. You'll see Otis Hoyt was a surgeon. I bet you don't know what these guys did. What we've forgotten about is that there are a lot of folks that didn't like the Civil War and didn't wish to be part of it. And the draft was on. I mean, each county had to fulfill its legal obligation to provide men. And so the Company A and Company D of the Hudson City of the 30th Infantry Regiment primarily went out with the draft officers to protect the draft officers.
After the Civil War, many Hudson veterans returned home to their families, while many other veterans relocated to Hudson, like Dr. Samuel Johnson. Dr. Johnson, a native of Kingston, Georgia, was born in 1842, and at the age of 20 enlisted in Company I, 16th Wisconsin Infantry. He was made an orderly and later took part in the Battle of Shiloh. After the battle, he was promoted to second lieutenant, but later in the year he resigned his post to continue his medical training. He was commissioned assistant surgeon in the U.S. Navy and served until the close of the Civil War. In 1865, Dr. Johnson settled in Hudson and began a 38-year career as one of Hudson's most prominent physicians. He married a local girl, Georgia Starr, the daughter of Sidney Starr. He also served as mayor, ran for Congress, and was Surgeon General of Wisconsin. He was medical director and manager of the Hudson Sanatorium at the time of his death in 1903.
Johnsons, who lived in this house here, he had come from Georgia originally, I think, and he was in the war there, and then came to Hudson, and he, I think, was like one of the first Surgeon Generals, and then he just was like, from everything I've read, just the most beloved man. He was just a very kind-hearted man that, you know, it didn't matter if people had money or not, he would go off and take care of everybody. And when he did die, at the very end, he, what finally did kill him is he had gone off, he was sick himself, and he went off to treat a patient who was sick, and it was very cold, and he went out and caught pneumonia.
Dr. Johnson was one of the many veterans who immigrated to Hudson after the war, but there were a total of 268 men who enlisted from Hudson and served in several of our National Guard units and military units. The first unit from Hudson to enter the war was Company G of the 4th Wisconsin Infantry.
The Hudson City Guards were all enlisted and mustered in, if you will, in April, around 1819, or 20th of April of 1861. And they were short about 25 people. And so they begged and borrowed and stole from River Falls and from Osceola and some from New Richmond to bring their numbers up to 101 on June the 15th of 1861. The war was 2 months old. Frank Steele came up the river, landed here on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon there were some 5,000 people in Hudson cheering on their guards. They were led down from the hill, from the camp south of town. There were huzzas and hoorays for the boys, and the band is playing music and everybody is cheering. And out into the river it goes at sundown. On the steamboat, all our Hudson City Guards became Company G of the 4th Infantry Regiment. The 4th Infantry Regiment, Hudson City Guards, spent the longest time under military, on the aegis of the military of any unit in the Civil War. They enlisted April of 61. They stayed in the Maine in Texas and rode outpost duty, and they were released then from federal duty, finally mustered out May the 28th, 1866. They got to Hudson on May 19th. If any of you know Hudson history, you know what happened on May 19th, 1866. That's when this whole area was all burned down. They got here just in time to watch the city burn down. Isn't that kind of interesting?
As soldiers were returning to farms and mills in the mid-1860s, farming was gaining on lumbering as a means of livelihood. With lumber so close at hand, it was natural that the town was built with wood. This proved to be a catastrophic weakness on May 19, 1866. James Andrews received letters from his family which told the tragic news of the Great Fire of 1866.
Hudson, Wisconsin, Sunday, May 20th, 1866. Dear Jimmy, I scarcely know how to commence writing. I have so much to write, and I am so stiff and tired. A terrible calamity has befallen Hudson.
At about 5 yesterday afternoon, the fire bell rang. We saw it was downtown and walked down that way. Not thinking it was going to be much of a fire, I did not think of being any help.
It was indeed a fearful sight. I saw building after building give way to the devouring element. Such a vast sheet of flame on each side of 2nd Street and west side of 3rd. From Locust to Walnut and up the bluff was destroyed, and it was feared at one time that our part of town was destined a similar fate.
The fire started in the rear of Horace Taylor's building. It was supposed to have originated by sparks from a pipe of a drunken man.
All the business part of our beautiful town had been laid in ashes. The one brick building on Walnut Street was the only building left standing in the main business area of town. The fire spread with the greatest speed.
The wind had been blowing a perfect gale all day, and everything was dry as we had no rain for some time.
I never saw such running and hurrying about. I think we have great reason to be thankful that no lives were lost. It was only by the most untiring effort that the 3rd Street dwelling houses were saved. They kept wet carpets on them constantly. Some of them caught fire a great many times. It was a fearful sight, although I hardly saw it as I was working so hard. I was at Mr. Otis's. The barn caught fire and the house in a number of places. I put a fire out in the kitchen. I was somewhat singed. I burned my eye winkers off so that my eyes don't feel very comfortable, and I tore my dress to pieces. I worked so hard that I am so stiff I can hardly move.
We thought for a while that the whole place was going, and I guess it would have if the wind had not changed. At about 6:30 it commenced to sprinkle, and we had quite a shower.
If the fire had happened in the night, I think there would have been almost impossible for all to have escaped. There were so many narrow escapes. There has been no church today. The Baptist and Methodist churches were filled with goods and are going to be used for stores for the present. It will seem strange to go to the church to buy goods. We all went downtown this morning. The streets were as full of people as it could be. The teams have been going all day, moving goods.
I heard there were 100 watchmen out last night. Still a great amount was stolen.
May 22nd, 1866. Tuesday morning. I did not send this letter yesterday as the mail was so disarranged that no mail went out.
It will probably go out today. Some of the mail was burned. People from Stillwater, Prescott, River Falls, and all about the country were here Sunday to see the ruins.
Joshua Smith had his stand out in the street yesterday filled with apples, confectionery, toys, etc. Last night he had a shanty and a tent set up.
I do not think there was ever a fire in modern times that destroyed the entire business part of a town and so many dwellings. 64 businesses and 25 homes were lost.
Hudson is in ashes, and I think it's a fearful warning to the city to grant no more liquor licenses and to procure fire engines. Fondly, Cecilia.
Lessons were learned from the fire. Upon rebuilding, new structures were constructed of brick and stone rather than wood, and a more adequate fire department was developed. A fire hall was built in 1872 at the corner of 3rd and Walnut Streets. This red brick structure housed the fire engine and had a tower containing Hudson's first fire bell. The bell is still in existence and is housed at City Hall.
This church as you see it now, opened in 1866, and that was the year of the big fire in Hudson. Most of the downtown was burned up, and people tried to rescue important documents and papers and business things and paraphernalia out of all the burning buildings. And where to put them? The Baptist church, the new Baptist church. It wasn't even quite finished inside, but they stuffed it with all the remnants of that fire. That was its first immortal day.
Hudson recovered from the fire, and the city continued to grow. With great expansion of business and population came the need to provide services. Hudson's first hospital was built in 1887 by Dr. Irving Wiltrout and named the Oliver Wendell Holmes Hospital because of Dr. Wiltrout's admiration for the celebrated American physician, poet, essayist, and novelist Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Dr. Holmes and Dr. Wiltrout carried on a correspondence prior to the dedication of the hospital, and Dr. Holmes was delighted to have the hospital named in his honor.
At the dedication in 1887, the main speaker of the day was Dr. Cyrus Northrop from the University of Minnesota. Furthermore, for the affair, Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, the sage of Boston, wrote an inaugural poem which was published first in the Star and Times in that year. It was called the Oliver Wendell Holmes Hospital. It really, it wasn't a full-fledged hospital, but it served the purpose for what they had, and they did have a nursing school to go with it too.
In 1894, the Holmes Hospital was purchased by Dr. Samuel Johnson, a beloved Hudson physician. He renamed the facility the sanatorium. Rates at the hospital were unbelievable compared to present-day standards. For $35 a week, a patient could have the best private room in the hospital. This rate includes medical attention, baths, and everything else in connection with the institution except medicine, laundry, and surgical operations for which an extra charge is made.
The old sanatorium, the Hudson Sanatorium, which was on the end of 7th Street, it was the only hospital Hudson had for many, many years. Well, it caught fire in May of 1934. Well, it was right at the noon hour, and most of the high school students were so enthused about the fire, they went to the fire and stayed for the whole afternoon. Of course, the next day there was difficulties when you went back to school. The Professor Rock, who was the principal of the schools, came and gave us all, we were castigated greatly for going to the fire, and we had additional papers to write and other things that weren't so nice. But to this day, I'm awfully glad I went to the fire, because it's one of the most memorable fires we've ever had.
Well, the sanatorium, back then, my home was only about 5 blocks from the school, and we had an hour off for lunch, and so I walked home and for lunch, and while I was there, my sister had a friend that drove her home, and then they heard that the fire trucks were going, so they decided to go to see what the fire was, so they gave me a ride, and I went, and I just stayed there all afternoon. I remember coming back to school the next day, and E.P. Rock, the superintendent, had a assembly for the entire school and told everybody off for the fact that they skipped school to go to the fire, but I think he would have gone too if he had a chance, but he didn't. So I remember the fire was a big one, and it was on the other side of the railroad tracks, and they had a hard time getting water over there. There were hydrants, but they weren't big enough to handle it, and the wind was from the northwest, and so it was blowing towards 7th and 8th Street and St. Croix and in there, and they had trouble with
roof fires there too.
Shortly after the fire, Dr. Bradford purchased a house at 1321 3rd Street and opened a small private sanatorium. Over the years, several Hudson homes have served as hospitals, including the Lewis Williams House on 3rd Street, which was the Williams Sanatorium. Dr. Boyd Williams operated a cancer hospital there until 1947, just 1 year before he died. A pioneer in the surgical removal of cancerous tumors, Williams was a controversial doctor who was a strong advocate of advertising. Back when the toll bridge served as the main entrance into the city, Williams donated the Hudson Arch in Lakefront Park to the city. Williams is buried in Old Willow River Cemetery, where his tombstone poignantly reads, "He made mistakes, he suffered much, he served well and honorably all suffering humanity who sought his assistance." Other home hospitals were the Boyden and Humphrey houses that served as maternity hospitals. Even the elegant Phipps Mansion served as a nursing home from 1951 to 1966.
Arnold Bertelson and Dean Erickson and I were at the Hudson Hotel, and we got talking about whether there should be a hospital in Hudson, and wondered if we could get enough money to start a study. Well, Cecil Day worked down at the First National Bank, and he had some money from Mr. Phipps. And so we got $35,000 to conduct a study whether Hudson needed a hospital or not. Well, of course, naturally we needed a hospital, but I guess you have to start someplace. And that's kind of how things started. My dad was very involved in raising money for the hospital, George Mueller. And he raised a lot of money from the Anderson family, Anderson Windows. And then, of course, Mr. Phipps donated a tremendous amount of money to the Hudson Hospital. Mr. Phipps was most responsible for the Hudson Hospital.
In 1946, the Phipps Foundation was incorporated for the purpose of aiding in the building of a new hospital. Starting with a donation of $70,000 from the Phipps Foundation, a fundraising campaign began in 1950 and continued through 1952 to raise an estimated $245,000 for the construction of the hospital. Other major contributors were Dr. Boyd Williams' estate, the Anderson Foundation, and Charlie and Yvette Ward.
Well, the Wards, Charles and Yvette, were great. They were beneficent people. I mean, really, they were very generous. They had the great interest in putting a hospital in Hudson. But now they were both concerned about it having acceptance in the community. So that is why they bought the paper, to put the hospital across.
Hudson Memorial Hospital, founded in 1952. People always took, our community took a great deal of credit because no public funds were used for this establishment. No federal funds were used.
The hospital opened in January of 1953 and was located on Liberty Hill just south of Prospect Park. The Hudson Memorial Hospital was named in the memory of the men and women who served in the armed forces.
There was one other thing that we might just close with, and that is your long service at the first Hudson Hospital.
25 years, yeah.
25 years. Kind of a hard job you did, too.
I did everything.
You were the face of the hospital. You were right up front.
I did all the admissions and the payroll and the accounts payable, and I did everything in the office. Well, yeah, and sometimes I'd even go up on weekends, you know, if it was the first of the month to do all that.
In 2003, the hospital was replaced with the Hudson Hospital and Clinics, located at 405 Stage Line Road. The 1953 hospital was subsequently razed. Hudson Public Library can trace its origins back to the Civil War era, when the Jeffersons opened a room in their home to the Ladies' Literary Association. Elizabeth Jefferson and Caroline Goss were devout members of the association and worked to promote and supply literature to Hudson residents. During the Civil War, local residents would gather at the house to search the newspapers for news of loved ones who may have died in action. From 1871 to 1904, the library was housed on the second floor of various Second Street buildings, including the Goss-Boyden Building, the Dibbo Building, and the Taylor Goss Building. Thanks to the efforts and vision of three prominent Hudson men and countless others, the Hudson Public Library opened its doors in 1904. George D. Klein, William H. Phipps, and James Andrews formed a committee to establish a library in 1902.
And George D. Klein has been called the father of the Hudson Public Library because it was George Klein that went to New York with Mr. Phipps and to see the members of the Carnegie Foundation for the building of the library. And this building was built in 1903 with money furnished by the Carnegie Foundation.
Klein and Phipps secured $12,000 for the new library with the stipulation that the city of Hudson provide a suitable site and appropriate $1,200 a year to maintain the library. The building was complete at the southwest corner of 3rd and Locust Street, but the library needed books. Thanks to donations from the Ladies' Library Association, the Hudson Volunteer Fire Department, the YMCA, Anita North, Hudson's first millionaire, and many others, the library opened in May of 1904 with a collection of nearly 3,000 books and magazines.
Through its 90 years of history, the Carnegie Library not only offered reading materials, but served as a community meeting place for many organizations, including the Women's Club. During World War I, Red Cross women used the basement to roll bandages for the war effort. The St. Croix County Historical Society used the library basement to keep its records and to display many of its collections until it moved to the Octagon House in 1964.
When the Carnegie Library became woefully short of space and because it lacked handicapped accessibility, the library was moved in 1995 to the former county building on 4th Street. In 2010, the library moved to 701 1st Street. Local historian Genevieve Klein Day was fascinated by local history, an interest she inherited from her father, George Klein, who had interviewed many of the earliest pioneers and published their experiences in his newspaper. It was Genevieve who made the first contact with the State Historical Society to place historic markers at the Indian Mounds in Burkmose Park, the site of an early French fort in Lakefront Park, and at the site of Louis Massey's home. It was her dream to have a historical society, and in 1947, she and Willis Miller co-founded the St. Croix County Historical Society. It was through her efforts that many of the pioneer family heirlooms were given to the society for display at the Octagon House Museum. Genevieve Day was vitally interested in civic betterment and affairs. She took her father's place on the Hudson Library Board, serving from 1919 to 1963. A talented writer and witty speaker, she was in great demand as a lecturer. Another of her lasting contributions was her book, Hudson in the Early Days, published in 1932 and reprinted many times. It is still considered the definitive history of Hudson's first years. Just down the street from the new library is a Hudson landmark. The Hudson Arch is the gateway to Hudson. But it would be meaningless without the Hudson Toll Bridge, one of the city's important early construction projects. Although it was not without its share of controversy, especially from ferryboat operators.
This, of course, is the arch to the old toll bridge. It says Hudson Wis, so we're setting the scene. The toll bridge, of course, was one of the significant factors in Hudson's history. It was built in 1913 and in 1917 became a toll bridge. Incidentally, the arch was given to the city of Hudson by Dr. Boyd T. Williams.
Harry North and Horace Champlin were the first men to give strong impetus to the bridge. North submitted the idea to the city council that the city of Hudson extend Walnut Street into Lake St. Croix, and the bridge company would build the span across the channel at their expense. The proposal was submitted to a vote of the people in April of 1911 and carried nearly 6-1. Local men made up the bridge company, investors including Hans Anderson, William Phipps, David Humberg, and Christian Burkhart. The Dike Road project cost the city over $37,000, while the cost of spanning the river was about $40,000. The Hudson Toll Bridge was formally dedicated on Saturday, June 14, 1913, with appropriate ceremony which attracted several thousand people. The gala celebration held in connection with the bridge opening was long remembered by many Hudsonites. The highlight of the day's festivities was the huge auto parade of over 100 cars making an imposing procession reaching from the Hudson City to the village of Lakeland. The toll bridge became the property of the city of Hudson in 1917, and the community benefited greatly from that source of income. It was reported that Hudson earned a net income of over $600,000 during the years of 1940 to 1944. Octagon House director Heidi Rushman talks with John Hughes about the toll bridge.
Do you remember the toll bridge?
Oh, sure. It was a very narrow,
Yeah.
rickety-looking span.
Yeah.
And you came down a very steep hill to the gate where you had to pay, and it was something like a nickel to 25 cents, depending on the car or how many people are in it.
Okay.
And then you get this long dike from the toll house over to the town, and only a few times were there bad problems on it. The people would lose brakes coming down to it and go crashing into cars.
Yeah, I remember the toll bridge that it was built in about 1913 or something, and it made a vehicle that is other than boat or railroad connection between Hudson and Minnesota, and it was very important. And when I was about 15 years of age, I was learning how to drive, and one time we came to a point that we were going to drive across the bridge, and I said to my dad and my mother, and back then you could have passengers in cars when you were learning to drive, and so I said to my dad, can I drive on the toll bridge? And he of course said yes, but my mother interrupted and says, you mean may I drive on the thing? And I said, no, I mean can I drive on it? Because she was had been a teacher and wanted everybody to use proper English language, and may would have been correct, but that wasn't my question. I want to know if I was capable of driving on the thing.
Yeah, I remember the toll bridge. The toll bridge, it costs a nickel to go across on a bicycle, because I ran away from home. And I drove my bike from Minneapolis to Eau Claire. And I had to have a nickel to get across. So I know that it was a nickel. I know that some of the guys used to drive across the Stillwater Bridge so that they wouldn't have to pay money at the Hudson Bridge. A lady worked for me at the hardware store, and she paid $29 in taxes on her house at the time. Nobody paid any taxes in Hudson, hardly, back in those days. And the bridge paid for everything.
Oh, about Dillinger. I forgot about Dillinger. My father was the toll collector at the time. They had a hideout up in Little Bohemia up in northern Wisconsin, he and his gang. And he evaded the police for years. And finally, well, the FBI has surrounded this resort up there, and somehow they escaped out the back way. He and had a carload of his henchmen, and the police were chasing him after they got away. They were coming down this way to get into Minnesota. And if they get to Minnesota, the police, Wisconsin police at that time couldn't do anything about getting them. So they came and crossed the toll bridge when my father was the toll bridge there. And caused a lot of commotion in Wisconsin and in Hudson.
The source of income for the city was destined to come to an end, but again not without considerable resistance by both citizens and local officials. The Hudson Toll Bridge question got a national airing during the blackest days of World War II, when Congress debated the pros and cons of whether a new free bridge should be built across the St. Croix River. The days of the Hudson Toll Bridge were then numbered. In November 1951, the structure was permanently closed when the new interstate bridge a mile south was completed and open to motor traffic. This was part of a nationwide highway building campaign that effectively ended the era of railway passenger service and ushered in the age of the family car. The pilings of the toll bridge can still be seen today.
The toll bridge had a second life, true to its guarantee that Warren Truss bridges were versatile and reusable. The main span of the toll bridge was reconstructed over the Kickapoo River in rural Lafarge, Wisconsin, and used until it was demolished in 1986.
While Amma Andrews was the first prominent builder in Hudson, another ambitious carpenter arrived in Hudson in 1883. John A. Lee was a native of Norway and was said to be a born carpenter. After a short time in the railroad car shops, Lee started his own business and literally changed the face of Hudson by his construction activity. He built nearly 100 homes and commercial buildings during his career, including the Humbird Chapel, churches, and the original pavilion and bandstand at Prospect Park, and the original bathhouse at Lakefront Park. While attractive structures are a big part of enjoying our city parks, the property they sit on needed to be secured first. Christian Berkmos is known as the father of Hudson's park system. Berkmos was born in Denmark. He arrived in Hudson in 1880 and began working with a flour mill of Comstock and Clark. After gaining experience, he opened a general store on 2nd Street. The store was an incredible success, and Berkmos operated it for 45 years until he retired. While his business thrived, Berkmos worked tirelessly to improve Hudson's park system.
Mr. Berkmos was a Danish immigrant that came to Hudson and founded a store which later became Ericsson's on Main Street here. He gave the tract of land which are Indian mounds.
He worked to acquire Liberty Hill and Prospect Park. The transformation of Lakefront Park from an eyesore of broken-down buildings and swampy shoreline to the scenic, popular park we see today was due in large part to the efforts of Berkmoos. But Berkmoos's greatest gift to the Hudson Park system was his donation of a 27-acre tract of land known as Berkmoos Park. This park is renowned for its prehistoric Indian mounds and incredible views of the St. Croix River and surrounding bluffs. The Berkmoos home was located at 627 Vine Street. Christian Berkmoos died in 1935.
Fred Kramer had the dime store in Hudson, Ben Franklin. And he and I got involved in the state park. And the reason that we got involved is Northern States Power Company was going to build a power plant on the St. Croix. And they were in bad favor with the people in Hudson. People in Hudson really objected to the power plant. And so we talked them into giving us 3,000 acres for $1 and ended up with the state park in Hudson.
This is the final resting place of the legendary Charles Allen Ward and his wife Yvette Henning Ward. Mr. Ward died in 1959. He was president of Brown and Bigelow for many years. He made Brown and Bigelow a worldwide institution. He lived in Hudson for a number of years, maybe 20 years. He was known for his great philanthropy and his flamboyant style. He was very generous. He gave more money away than he left, but he left plenty of that. And they still talk about Charlie Ward, and everyone has a story about him. He was a tall, robust man, and with a lot of personality. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Ward and what he did for our community.
I'm Darrell Stanifer. You might wonder why I'm standing here at the gravesite of Charlie Ward. Some of you may remember several years ago when the Historical Society promoted the first cemetery walk here at the historic cemetery, and I was asked to portray Charlie Ward. Charlie Ward was really a colorful character. He was born in about 1886 in Seattle, and he was born as Charles Manning. But his mother divorced when he was about 4 years old and ultimately remarried a gentleman by the name of Ward, and that's where Charles Ward came from. And apparently he didn't get along very well with his stepfather, so he left home at about age 17 and traveled all over the world, literally doing almost everything you can think of. The gold mines in Nevada, saloons and brothels in Alaska, steamboats to Japan, and ultimately he and a friend of his actually became quartermasters with Pancho Villa during the Mexican uprising. So when you talk about a character, that would be the history of Charlie Ward.
In 1919, he was arrested in Denver for possession of narcotics, a charge that he always denied. In 1920, he was convicted and sent to Leavenworth Prison.
He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and while there he met Herbert Bigelow, who was president of Brown & Bigelow, the calendar and greeting card company in the Twin Cities. And Bigelow had been sentenced for income tax evasion. So here you've got these two interesting characters, one a roustabout and one this businessman convicted on tax evasion, and ultimately they connect through a series of events. And when Bigelow gets out in 1924, he tells Charlie Ward, when you get out, you come look me up and I'll give you a job. Of course, never really believing that that would happen. So when Charlie Ward was paroled, that's exactly what he did.
After his release, Ward arrived in St. Paul and began working for Brown & Bigelow. He advanced quickly and became Bigelow's most valued employee.
While Bigelow was on a a canoe trip with his mistress in northern Minnesota on Basswood Lake, and most people now pick up and know this part of the story, he drowned. Well, as a result of the death of Mr. Bigelow, Charlie Ward now became the one-third owner and president of Brown and Bigelow, and as they say, the rest is history. So one of the things that he inherited as part of that was the large estate here at Hudson. Those of you familiar with Hudson would now identify that as the development called the Lighthouse at Hudson Pier.
Ward became president of the company and quadrupled annual sales. Over the years, Ward channeled thousands of dollars in charitable projects. He was also one of the prime benefactors in building the original Hudson Memorial Hospital.
Billy Miller was the one that knew him well. Charlie had this big farm out east of town, and he ran the big advertising agency in St. Paul, Brown and Bigelow, and his wife bought the Hudson Star Observer, and then they hired Billy to be a editor, or managing editor.
Charlie was very flamboyant, but he was awfully good to the city of Hudson. He bought the Hudson Star Observer. He in turn sold it to Willis and some of his friends. He owned a lot of the farms around Hudson. He would put on an annual show that his salesman would come to, and he would have them going up, bust out the door and go sell the world. Everybody bought calendars and everybody gave away calendars, and the calendar business was a big, big business. But Charlie made it a big business. Charlie would come into town and do business, and he'd stop in the stores and say hello to people, walk up and down Main Street. He'd often wear a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and he was a lot different than Mr. Phipps. If you could have two opposites, that would be two complete opposites.
In an effort to garner public support for the hospital, Ward and his wife Yvette purchased the Hudson Star Observer. It was there he met editor Willis Miller. Willis Miller was known as Hudson's foremost historian. His family moved here during his childhood. After graduating from Hudson High School, he attended St. Olaf College. Miller passed up an opportunity to teach in North Dakota to work at the Hudson Star Observer.
I was born in Iowa City, Iowa, on November 28, 1918. It was right during the great flu epidemic, and I had the flu the following year in 1919. I was the only person in St. Croix County that had polio. And of course, my parents were horrified. And Dr. Livingston, our local GP, was our doctor, and he came, and I was sick. And I couldn't be taken to a hospital because the hospitals didn't know how it was contracted,
whether it was
how you got it. And so I had to stay home, and my mother was quarantined there, and she took care of me. And I was off for the whole first semester of school. Aunt Murphy was my teacher in grade school. She taught here for, must be 40 or 50 years. And I came back to school. I hadn't been there the first semester, and the first thing she said, Willis, or she called me Billy. Of course, now you should tell your classmates here, you should tell them about your being sick and how it all happened. And so I related to them all. And you know, they all accepted it. I couldn't run and things like that, but I got along, and I wasn't a very good student, I guess, but I made it. And I went all through the public school system, and I graduated from high school in 1936. That fall, I entered St. Olaf College.
St. Olaf.
And I was there for 4 years and graduated in 1940. And during my experience at St. Olaf, I worked for the Norwegian American Historical Association, and it was really one of the turning points of my life in that I discovered there the basis for my Hudson Area Biographical Index that I instilled in Hudson in from 1940. Clarence Ryder, who was the publisher of the Hudson Star-Observer at the time, and an old family friend, said, well, we have an opening at the office. Would you like to try that? And I said, well, I suppose I could. And of course it would be, I would have to answer the phone and do the advertising, sweep out, and do the local news, cover meetings and all this and that. And it was really an all-inclusive job I had. And I think I started out at $12 a week, or was it 11, I forget which. But I was raised in 2 weeks till I got $15.
Now, when was this?
This was in 1940, right before the war. And so I've been there ever since. I wrote my first column along our street in October of 1940. And of course, I didn't have a car, I had a bicycle. And I rode back and forth to home and at lunch. So I really came out quite well. And strangely enough, I did save money by working there. Well, I was with the newspaper for 12 years, and my boss came to me and said one day, he said, Willie, I'm going to sell the paper to Charlie Ward. And I, of course, was concerned about my job. The morning that I got the call from Charlie Ward saying that he had bought the paper, or his wife had, said, come out for have dinner. He said, can you run a newspaper? And I said, I think so.
Miller was a natural journalist and writer. He would become publisher and chief stockholder in 1958. He sold his principal ownership in 1984, but continued to work at the paper until his death in 2008. In addition to his duties as a reporter, he compiled the Hudson Area Biographical Index, a comprehensive listing of the names and information on more than 56,000 Hudsonites. The index was compiled from local papers from 1890 to 2005. The index was published in 2007 by the St. Croix Valley Genealogical Society.
I read all the papers, and I indexed the deaths and marriages. Well, I had a small filing case of 6 drawers of 4 by 6. That would probably hold 30,000 entries. I think that'll last quite a while. But since then, it's grown to much greater proportions. Now we have some 200,000 entries for people that have had some connection with Hudson. Well, I've always been interested in genealogy, and so I documented these tombstones, all made, and I did this on a Sunday afternoon, generally every Sunday, and I would do this very systematically, copying off the records, and I did that, and finally we published it then later, and it has been very popular, we sold out.
Willis wrote several books on area history. He started his first book in 1940. It lists the tombstone inscriptions of the graves in the Willow River Cemetery.
And I love history, and Willis had written all these wonderful books, and they were the hottest items. And when I came here, the reason people moved to Hudson as much as anything was the history, the atmosphere of history. There were historic house tours through the years, my early years here. And everybody was excited about Hudson history.
Willis enjoyed travels throughout the world, but lived a simple life. Upon his death, Miller left over $1 million to be used as a scholarship fund for Hudson High School students pursuing higher education at the University of Wisconsin, Falls.
Willis Miller was a good friend of mine. I went to one or two or three of the first original meetings of the St. Croix Historical Society. Willis was very, very active. He was the advertising agent for the Star-Observer, and I was the advertising manager for Mueller Hardware. Willis was a neat guy. He did an excellent job for the Historical Society. He kept track of everything that went on in the community, did a magnificent job, and he's left a legacy. besides over $1 million to the University of River Falls. But I mean, what he's left in Hudson, you couldn't put a price on it. He's left information that we'll be able to use years from now.
Willis Miller leaves a legacy of preserving history and making history. As Hudson continues to look forward into the 21st century, it is important that we look back once in a while, too. History continues to be made as Hudson and its citizens reach new milestones. Let us not forget those who came before us.